Todd Rundgren,
Okay.
welcome to noise11.com, and it's going to be great to see you back down in Australia.
It'll be great to be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Yes. This particular show that you're bringing down, I mean, I know you've been on tour at the moment with Daryl Hall, and you've got a certain set list that you've been doing with Daryl. Is that the show that will be coming to Australia in 2024?
Well, I do an hour with Daryl. I'm the opener, and I do an hour of my own stuff with Daryl's band. And a lot of what I do there will be incorporated in the new show, but I play more than an hour when I do a solo show. I do at least 90 minutes if I'm doing a solo show. So it would be some of that, and then would be more material on top of that. The last time I went out with Davey Lane, and he put a band together, a terrific little band. And we played a lot of the stuff that even I hadn't played before live. He had requests for me. And so we learned a lot of stuff from like the ballad album, my second album, which is many, many albums ago at this point. Like I had never done the Night the Carousel Burned Down live, had never done it before I came down and did it with Davey and the band. So we're not going to be going that far back, or not that. I guess we were doing a little catch up for that. There were still some fans from way back when, and they had never, I hadn't toured in the 70s or 80s or 90s or anything. So I had to kind of, for that tour, pretend that it was the 70s, essentially get caught up with the 70s. I think we got into the 80s a little bit. I think this tour, we're going to be focused a little bit more on the 90s and the aughts and stuff like that. We're going to get some of the more contemporary material into the show. Also, we have our opening act, which is called something to do with sex. Just slipped my mind, but we.
Yes, sex slips my mind at my age as well.
Yeah. It's not sex on the beach, but it's something like that. My apologies to them, because they're apparently going to be, they have horns and singers, and they'll be helping us out. So it'll be a much bigger, musically, a much bigger show in February. Yeah. We can go a lot more places than we did the last tour that I did.
Well, because when you've been down here before, as you mentioned, Davey Lane from UMI, also Tony Featherston, who was in the band as well, huge Todd Rundgren fans, and probably know your catalogue better than you know your catalogue.
Yeah, they did. That's a matter of fact. It's like I was fumbling around and they knew it all already. So, but I tend not to reminisce that much. I guess at a certain point, some musicians, they just they get tired of it, or they run out of ideas or something like that, and they more or less retire from songwriting. And I still have lots and lots of ideas and horizons to explore and things like that. I can do that because that's been historically what I've done. I don't make top 40 records. I don't make, instant hits, that sort of thing. Most of what I do has a kind of a slow burn element to it. Is people often don't get it till the second time. Sometimes they never get to the second time, but it's, the kind of music that I make sort of reveals itself over repeated listenings. It's not all there in just one listening.
Are you getting a bit of a revival as a result of the television show And Just Like That, the Sex and the City reboot? Because, they've been using songs like I Saw the Light, Hello, It's Me. And one of the core characters, the deceased character in that, was
he did.
Todd Rundgren fan. So you're actually part of the storyline for
the funniest
like that.
The funniest thing about those things is, usually like a TV show or a movie or something, they'll inquire about a sync license. If they're going to use the original performance, they inquire about a sync license, a fee that they have to pay to use the song. But the way these series run nowadays, they don't want anyone to know that they're using the music until the audience actually hears it for the first time. So I hear it for the first. I get phone calls. You were on the season opener. I'm just like that, like that. Or you were in this other movie here about whatever. You were on the radio in this movie while a guy has an argument with another guy, that sort of thing. And the point is, they don't call you and ask for the sync license. They just use it and take their chances. Then they call you afterwards, and you could probably ask for the sky at that point because they already used it, and they can't unuse it. So it's just all of that is like especially amusing to me in a certain way, but I don't know that the audience at large is paying that much attention to that aspect. I admit that they did make a big deal about that particular song, but I don't know that someone would buy a concert ticket just for one song. Maybe. I don't know that it's a significant number of people would do it just for one song.
But it introduces you to a younger audience, though. And,
well, that
in particular, Gardens of the Galaxy, Paul, Virgin Suicides, they've all used that song. So that's a whole other audience that wasn't around in 1972 when the song first came out.
It is. And I don't know whether everyone who gets that kind of exposure gets a benefit out of it. So like I say, it's kind of hard to measure, but there is something measurable happening. In other words, I haven't done a serious tour of my own since before COVID. I've done Daryl. I've been doing Daryl recently, Daryl Hall. I'm doing these. I did a David Bowie tribute show last year. And I did a Beatles tribute show last year. I did a little bit of my own show, just kind of an informal thing. And I did Daryl last year. And then total, I was out about 9 months. Almost 10 months last year of constant touring. When I go out again in February here in the US, all of my guarantees have doubled since the last time I went out and did a tour of my own. And I don't know what it is that has caused that to happen. You pointed something out. That's a possibility of, adding maybe a couple of people to the audience. The constant touring possibly. But there is a thing, you mentioned a younger audience, and they communicate with each other in a way that an older audience doesn't. Like if they hear something they like, they're immediately on with their friends and say, check this out. So it's a lot easier to go viral with the younger audience. And I do have some musician fans, who are in younger bands, who don't mind mentioning what an influence I am on them, like the Lemon Twigs or Fleet Foxes, younger bands like that. And that, I think, may be contributing because I have noticed an uptick in younger people showing up at the shows. When you're as old as I am, you really have no choice but to start to appeal to new audience, because your old audience is literally dying. They're just getting too old to go out to shows anymore, or they're just too old to live anymore. So, the audience you had when you were in your 20s and 30s, they're constantly dwindling.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot to try and at least keep my show kind of fresh and have some appeal to somebody outside of my so-called core. My core be happy to hear, hello, it's me, and I saw the light, and blah, 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 Some part of the core would be happy with that. Some part of the core wants to hear utopia material. And then some part of the core, really likes the big band stuff, like the nearly human stuff and that. So, when I go out, I'm playing bigger places, bigger guarantees. It's a miraculous thing considering how late into my career I am. But who knows? I might be coming to Australia a lot more, if we can get enough of them young people out there,
We certainly hope so. Well, I guess a lot of what you did in the 70s, well, like you probably at the time thought you were just capturing the moment, but you were also planting seeds because like a decade after Can We Still Be Friends, Robert Palmer covers it. Decades after Hello, It's Me. Mary J. Blige comes along, and there's a version of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, at the
And
time.
then Adele plagiarizes it.
Yes, well, there's no royalties for
But
plagiarism.
I can't afford her lawyers, you know.
Yeah, but you know, that does generate your name over a long period of time. I mean, were you considering, even when you were doing a song like Can We Still Be Friends or Hello, It's Me, that other people would then be sort of passing the torch and taking it to another era?
No, I never do. You know, I write a song for me. You know, I write a song for me, for my voice, for what I'm thinking. I never think in terms of, you know, other artists covering it. It's always a pleasant surprise when somebody does, but I never think about that when I'm writing. I feel that that's kind of like it lets dishonesty creep in to the process. If you're suddenly trying to outthink other people rather than just trying to figure out what the hell you mean, you know, what exactly do you mean? You know, so that to me is always the biggest challenge. You know, the more songs you write, the harder it becomes because you've written so many already. You know, what do I write about now? You know, I've written 300 songs. What's left to write about? You know, but you know, you manage to find something somehow. And I still get excited about the prospect of writing new material and doing another record. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start another one as soon as I'm done this little tour that I'm about to do, and ideally it'll be done by the time I get to Australia. But yeah, I've got ideas, I've got a theme. All I have to do is just sit down and do it.
What about production? Do you do a lot of production these days for other people?
I don't do so much anymore. You know, I do it for myself, but I don't do so much anymore because the whole thing has sort of changed in a way. You know, it used to be the album was the most important thing. I mean, the long arc of the record industry was first it was singles. And if you got enough singles out, then you had an album because you had recorded a bunch of singles. Then the Beatles were the first so-called album artists. You know, Sgt. Pepper was the first album that had no singles on it. There was no single on Sgt. Pepper. They had Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, but those were singles and that didn't appear on the album. So suddenly there's this thing called an album artist, and that's kind of what I became. You know, you get focused on the larger thing, not so much the smaller thing. The unfortunate thing now is we're coming out the other end. And now, because we have social media and the internet and the ability to release a song the day after you thought of it, you know, now people just, you know, they make a song or they say, oh, I'll collaborate with this boy, we'll put the song out. So we're almost back to the age of singles again. Nobody thinks, or few people think in terms of the larger musical project. You do smaller things and then you accumulate them. I mean, it was like dumbfounding to me to watch SNL a couple of weeks ago, and an artist called Ice Spice is on there. Mm-hmm. And then I read a couple of days later, she's about to release her first album. Mm-hmm. She hasn't released an album yet.
And
she was a musical guest on Saturday Night Live. I thought things really have changed. You know,
well, it is a comedy show. It is a comedy show, and that's pretty funny.
Well, you know, I muted the damn thing. You know, I mean, it wasn't music to start with. You know, it's a beat of somebody talking. You know, and talking about the same old shit, nothing new. And so, yeah, I find myself doing that a lot. I find myself muting the musical guests on SNL a lot, especially if they start by talking instead of singing. So, but that being as it may. Yeah, my point is that, you know, everything is kind of fragmented again. You know, musicians are in competition with influencers, you know, people who go on YouTube or something like that and do something ridiculous and then get 1 million hits, you know, or 5 million views, you know, or something like that, or just making an ass of themselves. How do you compete with that as a musician? You know, it's hard to take it seriously anymore. So things have changed a lot. It's not necessarily in a great place for musicians, but stuff changes all the time. Things always change. The feckless nature of music now won't really last that much longer. I don't think. It's just too hard to keep track of who's the latest artist. No matter how much I try and like block things in my news feed, there's still some combination of Lil and some other words, something like that. And it's just the flavor of the week. It seems like the audience for that really doesn't care that much whether the music's any good. They're looking for a meme. They're looking for this week's meme, a funny phrase or something like that, and they'll use that phrase. They'll lift the phrase out of the song, and then the music is just disposable after that. Take the little diss out of there that you want, and the rest you'll forget by next week.
Yeah, but new music obviously excites and inspires you at the moment. Space Force in 2022, White Knight 2017, Global 2015, State 2013, Reproduction 2011. You have been very active in the last decade.
Yeah, I stay busy making records. I just don't always produce, or I rarely produce other artists, just because, as I say, the whole production thing has sort of changed. I mean, if you look at the credits for, a hit song, you might see 6 songwriters and 4 producers.
Yeah.
For one song. And so like I can't, that's not the kind of thing I do. I take someone who's having problems getting the music out of their head and onto the medium, and kind of help them get through that process. I evaluate the greater volume of what they've got. I want to hear all your songs. I don't want to make a record until I've heard everything you got that you could possibly put in that record. Pick out the best of it, refine it, tweak it. There's as much craftsmanship going into it as artistry in a way. There's no formula to it. It's, each song is its own challenge in that sense. How do we make this? We don't fit this into a box. We build a new box for this, that sort of thing. And it doesn't seem like music is that so much anymore. It just turn on the TRS-80 and start talking. That's it,
Yeah. Let me ask you about one of your productions, the Straight Up album for Badfinger. Now, that's credited as you and George Harrison. Were you working with George in producing that, or did you do separate songs?
No, the story is it's a real saga, that particular record. They actually had recorded an entire record with Jeff Emmerich, who was engineer for the Beatles in their latter days, when they were only a studio band. And apparently I don't know how it was received at Apple in England, but apparently the American Apple was not pleased with the result. They didn't hear any singles or something like that, or they just felt that it was wasn't what they were looking for. So George Harrison started all over again with them. But what he started was more of a George Harrison record than it was a Badfinger record. In other words, he did it the way he was doing his own records, with 3 acoustic guitar, like Phil Spector.
Yeah,
it sounded like Phil Spector, and he got like 4 songs in or something like that, maybe 4, maybe 5, I'm not sure, songs in, and he got all caught up in the concert for Bangladesh. And said, I can't do this anymore. You got to find another producer. And at that point, I was kind of up and coming as a troubleshooter. I was notorious for getting in the studio and making the record, getting the record done, not crapping around and spending more label money and frustrating the band. So I came in as that. The band at that point were kind of like, oh, God, we don't know anymore. It's like we made a whole record, started another record with different material, and that's not getting done. So they were kind of a little bit lost. I said, well, let's first do some of the material that you were going to do with George, because they didn't record a whole record. And that first thing we did was Baby Blue, very first song we recorded, brand new. And I thought that should be the template for the rest of the record. The record should kind of sound like that if we can, you know, and have that level of songwriting. So during the course of that, you know, I had Jeff Emerick stuff, which I could have used. And I think we used maybe 2 songs from the original Jeff Emerick recordings. We used 3 songs maybe from the original George Harrison recordings. And I remember going to the listening party for the Bangladesh album, and George was in the studio. I remember the first thing I did was, it was at Apple Studios. First thing I did was I went around to the drum booth and sat at Ringo's drums, you know, and this was around, you know, this was kind of after the Beatles had broken up, but the kind of the last sounds that they had gotten, you know, when Ringo started putting towels all over the drums and getting that thuddy sound, you know, the drums all had towels all over them, you know, and I hated that sound. Anyway, George was there, you know, I spoke with him briefly. He said, you know, I got no time for this. I'm out. Do whatever you want. Use the stuff. Don't use the stuff. You know, it's your gig now. You know, I don't have any time for it. So we did use a couple of things from George. I re-recorded much of Day After Day, because it sounded like a Phil Spector record. It sounded nothing like the rest of the records. It sounded nothing like the Jeff Emerick stuff and nothing like the new stuff, because my preference was always make the band sound like the band. Don't overdub a bunch of stuff on top of them so they don't sound like the band anymore. So I took a bunch of stuff off of Day After Day, re-recorded the drums, because they printed the drums with all this reverb on it, you know, this Phil Spector reverb stuff. So we re-recorded the drums to dry them up a little bit more, just eliminated some stuff from the mix and remixed it. Record comes out, and I'm not mentioned anywhere on the record, you know, on Day After Day. George Harrison, produced by George Harrison, you know, which it burnt my ass a little bit, you know. There was a lot of hubris in that, you know, and they never acknowledged it, never bothered to make it right. So kind of changed my opinion about the whole thing. And the fact that I got upset about it upset them, you know, because they felt like they had to defend George. So when it came time to do the next album, you know, I flew to London. I was ostensibly the producer. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. We did a session to get some sounds and laid down the track. And the next day I come into the studio and they said, well, we don't want you to finish the record. So they sent me home. And the record never came out. You know, they eventually finished the record, I think. But that was when the band really started to fall apart, you know, and it was a shame. They were, you know, a great couple of songwriters in the band between Joey and Pete. They could have been really successful and going on for a long time. But it kind of ended at Baby Blue.
That means there must be some amazing things in the vault then.
Yeah.
The vault exists. Is there anything in the Meatloaf vault for Bat Out of Hell, or did you use all of that on that album?
Well, Bat Out of Hell was all, you know, from scratch, yes. And, you know, I've told the story many times that I always viewed the album as a Bruce Springsteen spoof. You know, I never took the record seriously. I'm not sure how you could take the record seriously. After all, Jim Steinman did not take the record seriously. Jim Steinman viewed it as, you know, his music as kind of like a musical comedy. You know, there are weird puns and stuff all through the record. The whole thing with Phil Rizzuto doing the baseball call in there, you know, it's all a gag. You know, the Paradise by the Dashboard Light is a big shaggy dog joke, you know. Till he gets to the end, I'm praying for the end of time, you know. So it's much funnier than people realize it is, you know. It's supposed to be musical comedy in a way, and just people took it more seriously than that. But I don't know that it ever would have been anything if there hadn't been Bruce Springsteen first. Bruce Springsteen to do that whole reviving the 50s again, which never appealed to me. That's why my justification for doing the Meatloaf record was, this is kind of a joke. This is going to be, we're going to make a really funny spoof of Bruce Springsteen. It's going to be, everything's Bruce Springsteen isn't,
Yeah. The Halloween version of Born to Run.
Exactly. That's what Bat Out of Hell is, Bat of Hell is just Born to Run rewritten, but just with this really gory subtext to it, My name is recognizable sometimes, especially in Australia, for producing Meatloaf.
Yeah.
More than
Dragon anything. And Dragon.
Oh, don't forget Dragon. Yeah. Well, more than anything of my own, I think I'm known for that. But
no. When down here for me, it's Dragon, Meatloaf.
Yeah.
that was a very good album. We'll talk about that as well.
Well, it was they also had like they got Tommy Emmanuel to play on it, and anytime he's playing, it's pretty fantastic. So that for me was one of the high points of doing that record. To be able to work with Tommy. Yeah, he's a big deal now here in the U.S. He plays. Well, he's gotten connected to the public broadcasting system. They feature his shows, and then when they have a fundraising drive, they give away his CDs. In the fundraising drive, so he's gotten a big audience essentially by playing public television here in the U.S.
Yeah, well, and he's been around for decades down here, as you.
But good for him, Well, he didn't play much acoustic. He didn't play much acoustic guitar on the Dragon album. He played all electric. So, I didn't know exactly how proficient he was until like in the 90s. That was the first time I came to Australia. I'd never been before. I was in Sydney, and he was playing a gig in a small place in Sydney, just acoustic guitar gig. And that's when I was like, wow, he sounds like 3 guitar players playing at once.
Yeah. First time I ever saw Tommy Emmanuel, it sounded like an entire band was in the room, and it was just him on guitar.
Just him. I know. He's amazing. Yeah.
I don't know how he gets all those sounds, but anyway.
He's pretty magical. Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time. It'll be great to see you in Australia in 2024 again.
I'll be glad to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. And just so the audience knows, with the Australian band, Davey Lane, Tony Featherston.
Oh, it's going to be
down here by Andy Kent from UMI as well. So it's an Australian team you've got behind you.
Totally. It's going to be, we'll have like a big band, and we can do some stuff that I haven't done before down there, because we'll have singers and horns and stuff like that. It'll be great.
All right. See you in 2024, Todd.
Take care. See you next year.